Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the lecture series of the Research Center for Music, Media and Place. We have often tried in this series to effect some sort of interdisciplinary dialogue. And so tonight's panel is another instance of that. And I would have to say, I think it's the most adventurous interdisciplinary panel that we've had so far. So we're really very grateful to our speakers for being willing to engage in a talk across actual medical practice and research and different approaches to things. I think if there is one thing that's in common, although each of our panelists works in a different domain, the one thing that might unite their approach to their work is their definition of health and well-being as something that's not just individual but also social. And I think that interests quite a lot of audience members here as well. And if I'm wrong about that, I'm sure they'll set me straight. So we have three speakers. We're going to have each person do a 15-minute presentation of some of the work that they have been doing. And then at the end of that, we'll take 30 seconds to move chairs onto our little stage here so that we can have a conversation both among the speakers and with you, the audience, and there should be ample time for some questions and comments about those presentations. So I'm very delighted to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jane Gosine, who's my colleague in the School of Music and associate professor in the School of Music at Memorial, with research interests in 17th century French music, particularly the sacred music of Marc-Antoine Charpentier, about which she has spoken on another occasion in this lecture series. But she also has been more recently doing projects related to music therapy, and that's what we're going to hear about tonight. One of her recent projects focuses on community building through inclusive musical programming. It was conducted in collaboration with Susan Lazurier-Quinn, I may have mispronounced her name, and Easter Seals Newfoundland. And I see the Easter Seals logo on this PowerPoint, so I think we might hear about that one. So I'm going to keep the introduction short. Jane Gosine, please. Thanks.
Thank you. There's a long history of writers being fascinated by the connection between music and health, recognising the potential of music to serve in a healing and transformative capacity, physically, mentally, behaviourally and socially. For at least 40,000 years, Aboriginal peoples of Australia have used music as an integral part of healing. Philosophers from ancient Greece, Plato and Aristotle, refer to the power of music to alter or affect people's behaviour. While the intersections of music and health are many and varied, I'm going to focus this evening on the role played by music within the context of music therapy. Most definitions of music therapy refer to goal-oriented interventions by an accredited music therapist, where clients listen to music, talk about music. They create, perform, interpret and reflect upon music through improvisation, songwriting, vocalizations, movement, singing and instrumental playing, where the therapist builds a communicative, interactive and reciprocal musical relationship with the client rather than performs to a passive listener. Clients learn basic skills through multimodal interventions on which they can draw on in everyday situations, where music is a catalyst through which to improve quality of life rather than provide only curative care, focusing instead on increasing communication, physical movement and psychological well-being. Guided by the World Health Organization's definition of health as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. As we'll see, music therapy addresses each of these core concepts, sometimes independently, but more often with a holistic approach. Current research by scholars and practitioners from a wide range of disciplines is highlighting the ways in which music is used in relation to health. For example, it's used with individuals with breathing challenges, such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, to increase respiratory function and improve emotional well-being. In conjunction with rehabilitation, developing rhythmic entrainment. Within the context of mental health, addressing emotional, behavioural and social issues. enabling communication, where, for example, patients with aphasia can use the rhythmic and melodic inflections of song to facilitate speech, or increase fluency of speech with individuals who stutter. With memory association in helping individuals with dementia, and we're going to hear about that, I think, a little later. With autism, where it can increase communication, attention, and self-reliance, and encourage self-expression and creativity. Within the context of acute patient care, such as critical care, surgery, and oncology, where it's used to help manage pain. Within neurorehabilitation, such as a stroke, brain injury, or with conditions such as Parkinson's, where music therapy is effective because it simultaneously involves different parts of the brain. Although outside of the practice of music therapy, music also serves an important role within the context of areas such as health promotion and education in the form of entertainment education and social activism related to health. Scientific and medical research is pushing the boundaries of how our understanding of music can affect health. For example, in neurochemistry, where discoveries are being made as to how music can boost the immune system, reduce stress levels, and manage pain. Here, the focus is based largely on a pharmacological type model, assessing chemical levels in the body and prescribing music-based, non-invasive treatments. Here, music is a prescribed drug. While many advocate for such an approach, some scholars, such as Michael Buchan, have raised concerns that, used in certain contexts, this type of approach may ignore the concept of something like neurodiversity, with its emphasis on an acceptance of difference rather than treatment of what society perceives as deficiency. Perhaps one of the overriding considerations with any of these studies, irrespective of methodological approach, is to ensure that clients or participants have a voice. At Easter Seals, Newfoundland and Labrador, I'm currently collaborating with music therapists on a project that focuses on two basic premises. That participation in music making is a human right that should be equally accessible to all individuals, irrespective of ability. And that music has the potential to increase individual and community health or well-being. I'm also involved with a project run by music therapists at a children's hospice in England. The Treehouse Choir draws its members primarily from mothers of children attending the children's hospice, but also recently bereaved mothers and members of staff from the hospice, providing a holistic approach to increasing well-being. The project examines how music, in conjunction with social media, serves as a tool through which the individuals involved form a community built on shared life experiences, and how the choir also plays an important role in community engagement, which in itself has become therapeutic for the choir's members. It has enabled parents to interact and support one another, rather than using the traditional forms of parent-staff supportive relationship, and this has proved particularly powerful. Participation in the choir has enabled many of the members to regain aspects of their lives that have been lost, as well as increasing awareness of the hospice locally and nationally. One participant commented, "The life the choir has is something that we have all created together. It's a very powerful thing to feel a sense of belonging. No wonder it feels like family." Members of the choir talk about feeling uplifted emotionally and spiritually, of feeling a sense of escapism, feeling that within the choir they're free to have fun and enjoy themselves, whereas outside of that context they feel reluctant to do so. The choir has come to offer members a lifeline that provides support and companionship through singing. A fundamental element of music therapy is as a means of enabling or facilitating physical movement through the synchronization of sound and gesture, exploiting the connection between rhythm and motor behavior, as well as the role played by music as a form of motivation to continue with physical exercise or movement, a bit like the playlists that we use ourselves for exercising. In recent years, researchers have been studying the way in which rhythm can serve as an auditory cue or stimulus to the brain, to help with balance and more regular movement for individuals with neurological conditions, where music therapy can enable patients to use music as a physical enabler rather than focus on their current mobility challenges or limitations. As one of our participants commented, music therapy is relaxing and motivating. You play a lot of the songs I like, so it keeps you interested and relaxes your muscles, and it challenges them, and you don't realise they're being challenged. Her reference to the physically enabling power of music through the synchronisation of music and body movements is frequently observed during music therapy sessions, and is successful largely because it's done almost subconsciously. Many of our participants have engaged in physical movement that far exceeds their regular level of physical activity. For individuals marginalised for physical, social, emotional or psychological reasons, music can offer a unique means of self-expression and the opportunity to develop a sense of belonging, community, acceptance and mutual respect, to form meaningful relationships in ways that might otherwise be impossible. As a non-verbal participant commented, "I enjoy making music with friends, so it's pretty important in my life." And another, when asked what music meant to him, said, "Music's a part of me, it just flows." The music becomes a means by which relationships are formed and a positive sense of self-identity can be created and reflected. It functions as a medium through which to communicate, thereby facilitating social interaction and support, enabling individuals to build a stronger sense of belonging and community. The music therapist often takes the smallest gesture or sound, even a breath from a client, and begins to work with that and respond with music, improvising to create dialogue with the client, to build a relationship through expressive communication. Over the past decade or so, there's been increasing awareness of the benefits of the rapidly growing field of community music therapy, which emphasises a collaborative approach in which both the clients and the wider community benefit mutually from the experience of working together. It represents a paradigm shift within the field of music therapy by expanding its boundaries to promote inclusive participation in music making, reaching beyond the music therapy sessions into the wider community, often to effect social change, where the purpose of music therapy is both to provide the client with the means to participate in the life of the community, but also to help the community to accept and interact with the clients. In many ways, this type of approach acknowledges, if tacitly, Michael Becan's desire to respect neurodiversity and, more broadly, accept difference. Brynjolf Stiger has noted that health is a process of building resources for the individual, the community, and the relationship between individual and community. A sentiment echoed in government and health reports, such as the one noted here, where a strong sense of belonging is associated with the health of both the individual and the community. Stiger also outlines 7 core concepts that shape the philosophy behind community music therapy, represented by the acronym PREPARE, all of which we've seen in the project that we've had at Easter Seals. In addition to attending weekly therapy sessions, members participated in a number of workshops led by well-known members of the local music community. Activities focused on individual strengths and interests developed during the weekly sessions and drew on community and social resources such as shared music making and cultural exchange. Although not traditionally a part of music therapy, end-of-year performances have also become a meaningful experience for the participants and their families. For many, this has been their only exposure to being involved in a more public celebration of music making, and has served to build a sense of community amongst Easter Seals families, providing a normalising experience. In one workshop, members of the group collaborated with a local percussionist in learning new drumming techniques, exploring ways of using gesture to communicate, and developing musical leadership skills that encouraged physical movement through music, all within a mutual learning environment. A local choir director led a workshop that was vocally and physically inclusive, where participants were able to experience music through mind and body by integrating music and movement for the participants with a wide range of mobility. Everyone followed the dance steps, whether independently, with the help of an assistant, or with a mobility device and a partner. Another workshop focused on songwriting with a local singer-songwriter. Members of the group developed decision-making and communication skills, as well as an increased sense of identity, taking personal ownership of a song that they created together. The workshop led to a remarkable increase in the confidence levels of the group, both musically and socially, something that was then transferred into daily activities. The remaining workshops were with the Halifax-based band Ashlyn and with Sean McCann from Great Big Sea. In both instances, the workshop gave members of the music therapy group the opportunity to make music on equal terms with some of their musical idols. It also increased awareness of the value of accessible and inclusive music making within the community and the potential for mutual learning. After the session, one of the band members commented that the session was a mutual sharing or exchange, just through music, no words. Very cool. Another of the musicians commented that it just felt like a jam session with friends. And after the session was over, I walked out feeling a whole lot lighter. They asked me direct and insightful questions that forced me to really think about my answers. It was a reciprocal relationship between individuals collaborating with a social context, sharing anecdotes, philosophies on life, as well as music. The collaborations also aligned with an activist approach of community music making. Through the workshops, Easter Seals has received considerable positive attention through social media and news media, raising the profile of its participants within the community. There have also been collaborations beyond the music community. For example, with the Faculty of Engineering and Tetra Society, that designed an adaptive instrument for one of our participants that gave her the independence to play on her own, serving to increase her confidence, her social interaction, her musical involvement, and since she's non-verbal, her ability to communicate with the group through music. The collaboration also raised awareness of the importance of the availability of adaptive instruments. And you can see a quote there from one of the first-year engineering students who was involved in the project, and that appeared in a newsletter from the Tetra Society. Community music therapy has at its heart an ethics-driven approach, where human rights are central to the practice. Our research has been based on the belief that access to cultural activities, including participation in music making, is a human right. In addition to Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it states everyone has a right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community. The right to equal access to cultural and community involvement is embedded within numerous UN declarations related to the rights of the child and the rights of persons with disabilities, where the focus is both on a right to share culture and to be an active member of the community. The World Health Organization emphasizes the importance of individuals and groups feeling a sense of well-being and community, core concepts essential to feeling empowered to live healthy, meaningful lives, irrespective of disability or disease. Feeling empowered, having a sense of control over one's life, leads to an increase in self-esteem and well-being. As noted by the World Health Organization, empowerment does not occur to the individual alone, but has to do with experiencing a sense of shared experience and connectedness with other people. Used effectively, music has this potential to offer a sense of empowerment. Thank you.
I'm very delighted that our second panelist, and actually the inspiration for this panel, is Dr. Erin McKim. Dr. McKim is Clinical Chief for Long-Term Care with Eastern Health, and he's a family doctor at the Portugal Cove Medical Clinic. He has quite varied skills, including juggling and unicycling. And curiously, he asked about the height of the ceiling in this room when he first visited. So I don't know quite what we're going to do, but as far as I know, he will present his ongoing research on music and memory with Alzheimer's patients and their families. Dr. Aaron Kim.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to talk about the basic idea of using iPods in dementia care. We're also going to cover some current health challenges and what role music can play in helping some of that. And what we're doing specifically here in long-term care. I work in the Eastern Regional Health Authority, so Eastern Health as we commonly refer to it. And in that health region, we have about 16 different long-term care facilities and approximately 1,700 residents in those facilities. Now, we have about 80% of those residents that have some degree of cognitive impairment. And one of the issues that's been coming to the forefront lately in dementia care and in elder care is there's a very high use of medications that control problematic behaviors. So they're commonly referred to as the antipsychotic class. These are like risperidone, Haldol, medications that they often give people when they start to have aggressive behaviors or they start to get very paranoid or hallucinate sometimes. And it's all part of the process of unraveling when dementia takes on some of the advanced forms. So often these medications are used kind of as a last resort when they've tried everything else and the behaviors are threatening your staff, people are getting injured or punched in the face, or we have residents that barricade themselves inside their rooms thinking that somebody is trying to kill them. So it becomes very distressing, not only for the resident himself, but for the staff and for the other people who have to live in that same facility. So in Eastern Health, we actually have the highest rate in all of Canada for using these antipsychotic medications. And they have a lot of problems. They can cause cardiac arrhythmias, they can cause people's personalities to just be squashed. So they just sit there and stare at the wall, which of course is not what the goal of care is. But sometimes they do have very useful uses as well. They can take somebody who thinks that they're going to be killed in a very violent way and convince them that, well, maybe that's not the most likely thing that's going to happen. So I've definitely seen some instances where they're quite useful. One of the things we're trying to find is what else can we do to help people and to reorient them, to bring them back to themselves. And there's some very amazing evidence now that using music can give you a direct line into sort of the core of somebody, into their emotions, into their memories. And it can do it in a way that nothing else can in some instances. Now, it doesn't work for everybody. Some people didn't really like music that much during their life. And, guess what? When they're old and you play music, they don't really care about it. Right? Some people. But some people, it's miraculous. We've had some instances where people haven't spoken for 5 years. And their daughter kept coming every day or every other day to spend time with them. No conversation, no verbal interaction. And they started playing music with iPods. Now, it's not just any music, it's the music that's specific to that person. So generally it's between the ages of 16 and 26. The music that somebody listened to a lot at that time tends to have the strongest emotion, the strongest memories, the good old days, as it were. And if you play that music, in a couple of instances, this one specific one, this lady started talking again. And so the daughter had her mother back. Now, it wasn't complete, but she was able to have a conversation. She was able to interact, and the mother was able to participate in her own care and say, yes, I want this, no, I don't want that, yes, I want to wear the blue dress. And so it's quite miraculous sometimes, the effect that it can have. I'll talk a little bit about the current project we have going in 3 of the local nursing homes and a couple of the future possibilities that we have going. So, in our society right now, we have a major issue going on. It's listed by the World Health Organization as the biggest health issue on the planet. We have a very big aging population. So to some degree, the healthcare system and all of the other systems have been doing a great job keeping people alive longer. And now we're becoming a victim of our own success because we have so many people who are, 80 plus years old. We have a lot more demand on the infrastructure required to keep these people healthy and independent and happy. Dialysis machines, cardiac bypass machines. And if we keep people alive long enough, everybody gets dementia. Right? So there is such a thing as living too long. And I found this statistic really helped to put it in perspective for me, that 80% of the 80-year-olds and over that have ever lived since the dawn of humanity are alive today. 80% are alive now. So this is the frontier of our knowledge. We don't have studies that deal with this population. We've never had this many people over 80 before, over 90, over 100. And they're running into all kinds of problems. Polypharmacy, they're on 10 medications, 15 medications. Some of them are on 20 plus medications in nursing homes here. And we have no idea what happens when we have that much interaction with medications. So there's a whole bunch of new territory that we're discovering here. It's sort of the brave new frontier, as I see it, in medicine and in sociology in our society. So we have an exponential growth in the healthcare demand. So not only do we have an exponential growth of the people, but those individual people have an exponential need for all of this health infrastructure. And they expect it, If they need dialysis, they should have dialysis. If they need cardiac bypass, they should have cardiac bypass. And the problem is that our health infrastructure is based on finances. It's based on budgets. And that, at best, increases in a linear fashion. And so what we're running into right now, right here in this city, is, and everywhere on the planet for that matter, is a crunch. We have more people demanding to use the system than we have resources to facilitate that. So right now at the Health Science Center, 20% of all the patients that are sitting in there are not getting active treatment, they're just waiting for a bed. They can't go home because of whatever reason. They fell down and broke a hip, or they're sick, or they're demented, or whatever it is. But 20%, 1 out of every 5 patients at the Health Sciences is not getting active treatment. They're just sitting there, blocking a bed because they got nowhere to go. So the emergency rooms fill up, the waiting rooms fill up, the corridors fill up, and they developed overcapacity protocol. So basically put more people in the corridors. Then they developed double overcapacity protocol. And just this past year, there's a new term called Code 111. Now that means when they don't have anywhere to unload the ambulances, when everything is so full, so packed. Last week, there were 2 ambulances sitting in the emerge department for 45 minutes, couldn't unload the emergency patients that they had. There were no stretchers, no corridor spaces, nothing. It was chock-a-block. So this is a big issue, and this is going to affect all of us. Right? So one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how can we deal with this? And I think one of the major solutions, one of the only solutions we have, is to turn to our communities, to turn to our people, our supports, our groups. And that's where I think salvation is going to come. Certainly our biggest strengths come in the number of connections that we have to others in our society. So, as I said, 80% of the residents in long-term care have some degree of cognitive impairment or dementia. The demographic is getting older. And the generation that's kind of on the way out now is the generation of, well, I don't want to make a fuss. Don't worry about me. No, that's okay. That's good. The generation that's coming in, which is the sort of the forefront vanguard of the baby boomer generation, is the I want it right now generation, right? They want it, and if they don't get it, there's hell to pay. And so a lot of the managers are spending more and more of their time dealing with complaints, dealing with irate families, as opposed to actually, doing the things that they're supposed to do as managers and, getting staff and staff upgrades and education and sorting out the logistics. They're just chasing their tails, sorting out the complaints, and then they get burned out. Right? So there's a big crunch happening right now. Excuse me. So about 90% of a patient's time in long-term care is spent idle. Probably about half of the residents can't get out of bed. And so it used to be when they were admitting level 1s, level 2s, and level 3s, there was a bridge club, there was, bowling, they were playing games, down in checkers and chess. And now that's going away. There's probably only a few people on each floor who can actually get up and socialize and interact. Okay? And so it's changed the way things happen there. Most of the recreation therapy is gauged towards people who can actually come out and participate. When more and more people have to stay in their beds because they can't get out, and they just sit there. We don't have internet access in most of the places, and so people sit there, and of course they get bored. Of course they get ticked off and agitated. And so the therapeutic recreation, in my opinion, is one of the biggest resources we need to work on, and improving people's quality of life. We treat their heart disease and their blood pressure, but in terms of their spirit, there's way more that we can do. And so a lot of the efforts that I'm trying to work on sort of go in this area. Not to mention that we have not only an increase in the population, we have a decrease in the proportion of people in our society, in Newfoundland especially, who are available to work as healthcare and therapeutic recreation and all the things that people need. So we're getting it on both ends. There's more demand, fewer people, less financial resource, and fewer people to hire. Even if we had all the money that we wanted, which we don't, there aren't the people there to hire. So, talked a little bit about medications already, the antipsychotics, but we also have the highest rate of anxiolytic medication, of the PAMs, the diazepam, the Valium, Ativan, the medications you give to people when they're all upset, when they're anxious and agitated. We're the highest in those medications as well. And so it screams out that we need other modalities to use. And these things are being measured on a national level as quote, quality markers. There are certain things you look at to see how is this institution doing compared to that institution. The Canadian Institute for Health Information, CIHI as they're called, they tabulate data from all across the country and actually all over the world now. And one of the major quality markers is the use of these anxiolytics and these antipsychotics. So it's a big deal right now. Now, okay, so what we can do about this, they've recently commissioned a fairly extensive meta-analysis from the Gosine Institute, which is basically the government's research body, to find out what data is there to support different policies. And they looked at how can we get these medications down? How can we decrease our reliance and use of these medications, which have a fairly high potential to harm people? And the number one recommendation that they came up with, which had really good evidence, was music therapy. And music therapy in kind of various different forms. And so I was trying to find a way that we could institute music therapy in a fairly specific, definable way in the nursing homes. And I came across this group in the US. Musicandmemory.com is the website. But it's a non-profit organization. It's affiliated with I think Harvard University, and they are basically there to try to help institutions primarily use iPods to bring music to people who are marginalized, mostly long-term care facilities, mostly elderly. And I'll play a little excerpt from a video that was made about that in a little while. So the other things that they found had good evidence to support were staff education and reassessing medications, basically looking at should we decrease the medications. So with music and memory, the main component is to use a personalized playlist. So you take music, as I said earlier, that meant something to that person, and you put it together in an iPod, and then you play it for them. And right now we've got 3 different nursing homes that are doing a fairly good quality research project looking at patients with the iPods and the personalized playlist, and then looking at a similar randomized population that just uses without iPods, just what they've been doing all along. And we're comparing the rates of aggression, the need for medication, the instances of acting out. We're also interviewing the staff and finding out how do the staff find their what they refer to as care burden. But how difficult are these people to look after? And then we're going back and looking at the actual dollars and cents and medication usage. So, and this project has a couple of different layers. So the first layer is we'll play music for people who are agitated or bored. There's also evidence to show it helps with pain, it helps with anxiety and depression. The second layer is we talk to the patients and their family and their friends, engage the music therapist, engage the staff, and talk about music and talk about quality of life. And then another part of this project, which is kind of interesting, is they do iPod drives in the community. So we're right now just about to start an iPod drive through Holy Heart, but we're also going to be doing it through various connections to the nursing homes. St. Pat's is one of the nursing homes where we're doing this, and because they've got a very strong parish connection, they've got a lot of community groups that are associated with St. Pat's. So we're going to be sort of pushing the tendrils out through all of these different connections into the community. And one of the interesting parts of it is they get high school students to organize these iPod drives, and they can then use that as volunteer hours, which work towards their certificates, the IB International Baccalaureate programs and things like that. So they get their volunteer hours, and they get to help the elderly. And some of the ones that are actually keen will come into the nursing homes. This has happened in other areas, and help with updating the playlists. Right? And so anything that gets a high school student coming into a nursing home to help out, I think is great, regardless of whatever the other effects are. And so last year's iPod, which is sitting in somebody's drawer somewhere, can then be mobilized and used to actually, do very real good for a marginalized population. So it's sort of everybody wins. And then through that, we get to have some discussion on elder care, on dementia care, on quality of life. And that's something that's not talked about in our general day-to-day experience, especially not in high schools. That's sort of a whole other world. So it's got a lot of interesting aspects to doing this. All right. Another interesting side effect where this has been tried in other regions. A friend of mine who helped me get this going was involved with a similar project in New Brunswick, in which they had 3 long-term care facilities that did a similar project like this. And one of the effects afterwards is that the long-term care facilities, which were kind of autonomous and not really talking to each other, after they did this project together, they started collaborating. They started, sharing resources, doing joint projects together. And so it forms connections. It forms all of these kind of connections, not only within the person and connecting them back to their memories and their emotions, but it forms connections throughout the community, kind of through our society. All right. Another interesting aspect here in Newfoundland is there's such a strong tradition of music. It's very culturally based, and is one of the things that kind of brings communities together. Probably more so here than a lot of other regions in North America. So there's, I think, a huge potential here to really, grab this and bring it home. Now, see if I can get this video going. Now, so like I said, we originally had 4 nursing homes, and I'll be brief because I'm getting to the end of my time. We had 4 nursing homes that were originally interested. One of them, they had construction at St. Pat's, so they had to delay. Glenbrook Lodge, the rec therapists went off on sick leave, so that was a non-starter. But we started at Harbour Lodge in Carbonear, and we started at St. Luke's. St. Luke's has a really great music therapist there, and she was all over this project. And so when we approached the music and memory people, it cost $1,000 for the first institute to join and get proper training, and it cost $600 for every subsequent institute to kind of join in that. They did 3 half-day webinars, which trains people on how to present this project to management to sort of sell it, how to do the personalized playlists, the practicalities of how to store the information, how to get the most bang for your buck in terms of buying iTunes cards and things like that, and then how to do iPod drives. So they have quite a wealth of information, of publicity materials, of all kinds of things that they've done up, of policies of how to clean them in institutes that comply with current infection control protocols. And so, and as part of that, we also got 15 iPod setups. So the 15 iPods minis, the iPod minis are the best ones. They've only got one button, so you can't get into trouble and get down. You just turn them on and turn them off. They use the headphones that are external. You saw the ones that Henry was using in the video. Sometimes it works better if they have a speaker, but the speaker kind of gets into other people have to listen to the same music that you're listening to, which can lead to some conflicts. And we found that 6 of the iPods that were secondhand and reconditioned didn't work, so I just phoned them up and they just sent them to me. Friday I was speaking with them, I got them in the mail today, so they did quite well. The research we're doing, there was some debate about the structure, if we could really do a full randomized or if it was more convenient. And the whole randomization thing sounds great when you're talking about research, but it didn't really work very well in the context of the nursing homes because some of the people that got randomized just weren't going to be interested at all. There was one instance where a lady who was deaf in one ear or didn't have an eardrum and she wasn't able to use the setup and she wasn't interested. There was another lady who only spoke Russian, so it was really hard to kind of communicate. And for a couple of other reasons. So we kind of used a melding of the two. We had control groups. We were measuring some quantitative things like use of medication and some qualitative things. We were doing interviews with the nursing staff afterwards to find out from their perspective what worked, what didn't work. Because we're also doing this as a pilot so that we can try to roll it out across the other nursing homes and do it more efficiently. And know where to target this. What types of people will benefit from this more, and what types of people probably won't, so that we can sort of target our effort more effectively. So the 3 outcomes that I discussed there, benefit for the patient, benefit for the nursing staff, and then decrease the medication usage. And we're currently in the process of collecting the results. We've had, we did it in blocks of 5, so 5 playlists for 5 residents 1 month, and then another 5 the next month, and another 5 the next month. Because it's quite time-consuming putting these playlists together and getting all the logistics worked out. So 5 people a month is pretty well all that somebody can manage, along with all the other program stuff that they have to do. Some of the factors that really made it difficult to implement with staffing shortages, often you get temporary staff floating in. When the temporary staff come in, they don't know anything about the project. So you spend all this time and effort, talking to the nursing staff, getting them to buy in on it, and then half the time there's some other person who just kind of shows up at the last second to fill in a spot. So staffing shortage is a big thing. Also, new staff coming in need to be completely start from scratch again. At Harbour Lodge and Carbonear, the management was actually, there were supposed to be 3 managers between the 2 nursing homes, and there were actually 1.5. So the managers were rotating around, and when the manager wasn't there, there was nobody to really kind of tell the nursing staff, yay, let's do this, let's go ahead. And so some of the nursing staff were like, if we don't have to do it, we're not going to do it. If it's optional, no, we're not going to do it. We don't have time. We don't want to. A lot of people are disengaged. They're kind of close to retirement. They're fed up. So it's kind of hard to get around that. And there was also one of the biggest difficulties was to get around the ethics board for this. We had, because we're doing research on a marginalized population who often can't advocate for themselves. They looked at it, and then we had to make another presentation, and it actually delayed this project by about 6 months because we had to keep going back to the ethics board and resubmitting.
In the first place, said the chair. Sorry, I just had to disclose that.
Well, but it kind of made me wonder. This is sort of a program implementation thing, and my understanding is that for program implementation and measurement of programs that you're doing, you don't actually have to submit to the ethics board.
Yeah, you didn't have to look at the ethics board if you weren't doing research.
So
Sounds like a good subject.
Sure. All right. So, future projects. One big thing that I've talked with a couple of people here about already is there's a huge body of archives of music and stories and recitations that was recorded during the 50s and 60s in rural areas of this province, all over the place. And that's pretty well the population that is now in the nursing homes. And so if we can go back and find out where these patients were from, which communities, which time frame, and then we can go and link that up with the archives that we have sitting over there at QE2 and sitting up, I think there's some up in Ottawa too, isn't there? Then we can actually try to get the tunes that these people listen to, the actual recordings of their uncles or their aunts or brothers or parents who, or aunts for that matter, who sang the songs, and get the songs that they actually listened to. I think that would be a very exciting aspect to this project if we could somehow arrange that. So maybe if any of you guys have ideas of how we can make that happen, I'd love to speak to you afterwards. And like I said, we're currently going to be organizing an iPod drive in the community, and we're going to try to make it as big as we can. Hopefully we're going to get CBC involved, some of the other networks. So keep your eye out for it when you see it. Pass the message along. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much to Aaron and also to Henry for helping us understand the story. I'm sure there's all kinds of interesting discussion, but we will go on first with your third presenter. Dr. Fern Brunger is Associate Professor of Healthcare Ethics at Memorial University. She's a medical anthropologist whose research and teaching is at the interface of bioethics and anthropology. Her areas of specialization include cross-cultural clinical ethics and the ethics of health research involving socially identifiable populations. She's contributed, for instance, to policy statements such as the CIHR guidelines for health research in Aboriginal communities. With no further ado, Fern Brunger. Thank you.
I want to say it's really daunting to go after such important and really practical projects. I'm going to do a bit of a thought experiment instead, okay? My task, or the way I understand my task, is to try to talk a little bit about the intersection or intershaping of cultural context, self, the arts, and health. And so really what I want to talk to you about is the globbiness of culture. Actually, let me back up for a second to make this even clearer to you. I think when we're talking about things like how medicine and health in the sense of well-being and music interact, what we're really getting at is this idea of self. Okay? And the idea of self is culturally constructed. So the way that we imagine the self in Euro-American societies, for example, gives us this idea of a mind-body split. Because we had this guy called Descartes back in the 17th century who realized that he could doubt that his body existed, but he couldn't doubt that he existed. Okay, so thanks to Descartes, we have this notion of the self, that's the idea of the self as a mind. Okay, and where's the mind located? In the brain. Now, it wasn't always. It started off in the pineal gland, at the base of the neck. That would seem to be the interface between the mind or the self and the brain. But these days we see it as one. So for example, and this is anthropologist Clifford Geertz observed many years ago that around the world this idea of the self as a mind located in the brain is really weird. Okay? Most places around the world don't think of the self that way. So for example, when the idea of defining death as brain death came up in North America, none of us noticed, none of us cared. It made sense intuitively, right? My brain's dead, I'm dead. I am in my brain, right? In Japan, they tried the same thing. Huge public outcry. Just because my brain is dead does not mean I'm dead, because in Japan, the sense of self is suffused throughout the body. It's not located in the brain. If it's located anywhere, it's here, in the solar plexus, where the center of key is seen to be concentrated. Okay, so that's just a bit of background there on self. So, but what does that mean for our discussion today? It means that when we're talking about music and medicine, or music and well-being, or the arts and well-being, we've got this really interesting thing happening where we're talking about it in a way that really, really rests on this idea of a mind-body split. Okay? And that's what I want to sort of challenge a little bit for us. Not only to help us understand better how medicine impacts on how music impacts on well-being, but maybe also to see what we can learn from some other cultural ways of understanding the self. Okay? So, I'm going to use two examples to explain this. And these are examples from two different cultural communities that I've collaborated with, where the people have helped me to really understand these varying notions of self in relation to health. So the first community I'm going to talk about is the Sri Lankan Tamil community of northern Sri Lanka. I have worked with refugees in Montreal from that community. And the second, so these are Hindus, worshippers of the god Shiva. Okay? And then the second example I'm going to use is a group that I'm currently collaborating with in southern Labrador, the southern Inuit of the land claims area of Nunavut. Okay? So let's start by just looking at the Tamil concept of self. So the Tamil concept of self includes this notion of the idea of gunam. Okay? And what gunam means like bodily nature. It's about the fundamental quality of the personhood. And that includes moral and spiritual quality as well as the physical stuff that makes up the body. So this idea of guna means that the body is not a solid entity. This idea of individual doesn't make sense because the body is porous, it's fluid. So it changes. Your bodily nature changes depending on what you eat, who you interact with, where you were born. For example, the soil that you were born on, because you eat from that soil and drink the water from that soil, changes your fundamental bodily nature. Okay? So any disturbance in the way that those bits of bodily nature flow in and among people and between a person and the wider context can lead to a decrease in well-being. So in traditional Siddha medicine, which is related to Ayurvedic medicine that you might have heard about from India, the idea here is that as bodily substances, or the nature of gunam, is exchanged and intermingled, so too the idea of the self change. So your identity actually changes depending on what you're doing, who you're spending time with, and so on. And the three humors, which are wind, bile, and phlegm, are related to those bodily natures, and they have to be in balance. And if they get out of balance, then you're sick. That's basically the fundamental principles of Siddha medicine. And the kinds of crises that can cause a body to be out of balance can be anything. It can be the fact that you had a fight with your mom. It could be you ate some food that wasn't appropriate to your particular bodily disposition or your particular gunam. It could be the position of the astral bodies at that point in time. It could be the season that you're in, so you could eat this food in May, but you shouldn't eat this food in October, for example. So any of those things can put the body out of whack. And the purpose of healing is to make the broader environment compatible or appropriate to the body. So when the body is out of whack, when a dosam or a disturbance is angry or excited, it increases in proportion to the rest of the body, and that's what causes the imbalance to happen. So illnesses caused by these imbalances of the humors are described in terms of the body being overheated or overcooled. And so you have to give medicines that heat or that cool to rectify that balance. And even foods are regular everyday foods are medicine that can cause the heating or the cooling effect. So depending on your bodily nature or your gunam, you will be given a different kind of prescription by a healer, a prescription for either a different food or for lifestyle or for medicine or whatever. So this principle of making the body appropriate to the environment and this idea of the person as having a fluid body is key to understanding well-being. So just to explain this a bit more, even the way that you eat, so you take your hand and you take the rice and you take the curry and you mix it so that the nature of rice and the nature of the curry becomes intermingled and intersuffused, if you like. And that changes the nature of the whole thing. Then you pop it in your mouth and eat it and your body changes. Okay? This is an image of a little boy in a rite of passage early in childhood where he's being taken and his finger is being made to trace the first letter, the letter A, or the letter that makes the sound A. And that rite of passage inscribes on the body the same ideas around mixing and matching and this idea of a fluid body. Okay? So the idea is that your action can change your bodily identity. So what you do changes your fundamental nature in a physical, biological sense. And the same goes for who you spend time with. If you mix with the wrong sort, you can go bad. Okay? So who you spend time with changes your physical bodily nature. And so when we think about something like Bharatanatyam or the classical Indian dance, it's not just dance. It's about the self in this fluid sense. So when it reminds us of Lord Shiva, whose dance has no beginning and no end, this reinforces ideas about mixing and bodily natures and harmony and so on. And so, just to wrap up this bit, in that conceptualization of the self, the body is part of the broader physical and spiritual space. The physical body doesn't stop at where we would imagine our body to stop. It extends to include the land that you live on, the positions of the astral bodies, the planets and so on, and the sights and the rhythms around us. It's all one. Poor health means being out of balance because one of those things in the globiness of culture is out of balance. And to correct it, you have to just manipulate something else. So, for example, you might have to do a dance, or music might change it, or the drawing of a ritual image on the floor can rebalance the body. Now, let's just turn briefly to another example, the Southern Inuit on the land plains area that's recently been named Nunavut. I just want to read this to you because it's really important for me. I think it's one of the key ways to understand the concept of self for the Southern Inuit. And this is what they invited me to when they were trying to explain this stuff to me. Nunavut, who we are. Our traditions resonate with the ways of our elders, our respect for the environment, the sharing of our harvest, our knowledge of traditional medicines and practices, and our care for each other. Pause that and remember that. Our care for each other can be traced directly to our Aboriginal heritage. This Aboriginality and our ties to our land and our resources, that's a key point, is core to our existence. We've always been here. This is our home. So for the Southern Inuit, health and wellness relies on a strong sense of identity with the land and belonging on the land. Concepts of self emphasize mutual reliance and interdependent roles and relationships. And this is in a way that includes relationships not just with other people, with community members, but relationships with the land, with the animals, with the ancestors, and with future generations. Okay? This is Arctic chart drawing. Health includes working for the common good, this idea of mutual interdependence, this idea of respecting all living things, of maintaining harmony and balance in a sense that encompasses both the environment and social balance. And the idea of being able to plan for the future, because part of identity is this idea of a kind of a stewardship to future generations. Every person is linked to the broader physical, animal, and social environment, and there's an emphasis of there needing to be a balance in all living things. And living things in this worldview includes anything with a life cycle. So the weather, the seasons, the rocks, the waterways. All of this is included when people talk about the health of the people and the land. And the health of the people and health of the land is one thing. Okay? Importantly, the concept of health includes the sense of cultural health. So the sustainability, stability, and well-being of traditional practices in terms of relationships with the land and with each other is what's key. So music comes from and reinforces this idea of mutual roles and interdependence and support. I think that's especially characterized by the throat singers who are in a mutual state of interdependence to make that sound happen. In this conceptualization of the self, the body is part of, in a physical and spiritual sense, part of the land, the animals, and the sights and the rhythms that surround us. Poor health comes from a loss of feeling of mutual reliance, the loss of interdependent relationships with the land. And healing is about restoring the land and the relationship with the land. So, for example, I heard recently somebody point out that the drum beat is the heartbeat of Mother Earth. So in both of these worldviews, we have the idea of music changing the bodily composition in a really direct way. Okay, so we're going to turn back to body and mind, that dichotomy in a second. But keep in mind that for these worldviews, there is no this relates to that. It's boom, it's one. It's like the difference between, for you musicians. So you have the piano where you hit the key and then that hits the hammer and that hits the string, compared to a guitar where you pluck it. And think about how much more proximate that plucking of the string is compared to the, with apologies to all my fellow piano players. And then compare that again to the vocals, where you are the string that is plucked, right? Ooh, that sounded fun. Okay, so it's that kind of immediacy of transformation of the body, okay? So compare this to the way that we understand in Western biomedicine the ideas of how music and medicine, or music and well-being, if you like, might interrelate. So we have this trinity, if you like, of mind, spirit, and body that are separate but influence each other in this Cartesian sense of mind-body split. Not in a sense of being one, in a sense of being related. Okay? Again, like the piano, the keyboard to the hammer, and so on. So the body is understood as discrete entities that fit together to make the whole work. So this cartoon is really a culturally specific cartoon. This only works in a contemporary Western way of imagining the body. And I know you can't all see this. It says, Bob decided his body needed a complete overhaul and he's got his heart out and he's repairing it. Okay? So it's a culturally specific way of understanding the body. Same goes for the mind. The blob is leaving, says, see ya, great party. And the caption reads, as expected, the mind is the first thing to go. Now that's only funny because you believe in a mind-body split. Right? Okay, this is your brain on music. So music is seen to shape well-being because it does something to the mind/self located in the brain that then has an effect on the body because of the body's relationship to the brain. Okay? And we can put another level of society there just to make it even clearer. So this idea comes from and reinforces the idea of the individual, okay, comprised of a self, brain, and a body, in a relationship with, but not one with, the broader social and so on context. So note how different this is from the Tamil and Southern Inuit ways of imagining the self. So this is just my final and thought-provoking slide to leave you and lead you into discussion afterward. What are the implications of everything that I've said in terms of understanding music and medicine, in terms of music therapy, for example? Well, one thought I had, especially listening to some of the really important projects that are going on right now, is that when you think about it, our way of imagining the importance of music therapy is actually the most naive and simplistic way of imagining it, right? If we turn to other cultural ways of imagining why it might be important, for example, to do music therapy, wow, that's a powerful argument, right? Boom, immediate impact on the body, none of this going through other processes. So one possibility, for example, is that we might think in terms of how to leverage funding for music therapy programs, is that our own argument is actually the weakest of all of the arguments around the world about why it might be important. And maybe we can sort of leverage these other cross-cultural frameworks for understanding the relationship between the self and well-being and music as a way to sort of garner support. And I'll leave it there with one final quote, because I always like to end with a quote. There we go.
Very much for, well, as we expected, there's all kinds of differences between the ways these projects and presentations have raised topics, but there's also, I think, some very interesting intersections and areas for questions. We're going to take 30 seconds to put 3 chairs on the stage and begin the discussion. And if you want to stand up, that's all right, but don't go away. thanks very much. I think there's probably a lot of questions from the floor, but I'm going to start by saying, do you have some questions for one another?
I have a comment, and that was sort of related to the very first slide that you gave, which was talking about the self as being everything altogether and not separating. And in many ways, what's happening in community music therapy, in a simplistic way, maybe, is trying to bring together those elements. And there's the idea that I think a lot of people in community music therapy are looking to ethnomusicologists to try and understand what is going on, and that's why the focus has been on the idea of health and well-being. And while it's being defined in these separate entities, it's for the benefit of people to understand what it is that music is doing naturally, and that the reason why music therapy can work, and music therapeutically, not just I think music therapy, is that it does target all those different aspects, and that, I mean, for thousands of years, probably forever, music and dance was never separated. Music and movement naturally went together, but we separated it. We understand dance as one thing and music as something else. And yet, those two, if you look back at paintings from thousands and thousands of years ago, the two come together, and that the reason why music can be used for people, say, with Parkinson's disease or with other conditions where mobility is an issue is that it's tapping into that very thing. But we have separated it.
Yeah, I love that comment. And actually, Oliver Sacks in your video, that when the bit about Henry, we saw Henry come to life, and the way that Oliver Sacks described it, I think that's exactly what your point, right? What's happening in reality is that it really is that boom, direct throat thing, not piano thing, right? We see that happening, but it's the way that we framed out our way of understanding what's going on that I'm holding up for scrutiny, right?
But at the same time, there's that kind of unity maybe in some of these other conceptualizations that we can learn a lot from. It also points to cultural difference, and this comes in maybe as a question for people, well, for your project, Aaron. You mentioned the Russian speaker. Now, does an individual speaks a different language and doesn't have as large a community here? How do you do the playlist for that person? How do you create that same sort of support for people from even a different language, let alone a whole different cultural background?
Yes. She hates traditional Newfoundland music. So like this. No, they're doing the best they can, but...
It seems like
Russian music somewhere.
Oh yes, they're tapping into resources they can connect with. But.
I think with some of these projects, the ideal is that when somebody is admitted into a nursing home or into hospital, that one of the first questions the social worker or the medical person should be asking is, what are some of your favourite music? And at that point, it might not be the individual who can answer those questions if they already have dementia, but a lot of people going into extended care aren't at that point. There are many people who at that point can articulate very well what their preferences musically are, and that this should be part of what the medical chart includes.
What they do as part of the medical chart, they have one section that they're doing for everybody now. It's called All About Me. So basically, what are the parts of your life that you like? What do you do for enjoyment? Where are you from? What's your context? Included in that is music. And where we're doing this music and memory project, we're trying to kind of up the emphasis on, is music a significant part of your life? And if so, what types of music do you like? And should give us the starting point that we can then start to build a playlist and provide that music to people.
And I think also some of the music that people don't like and that might be significant for negative reasons, because if the aim of using music within this sort of project where you're using it often to try and help people's emotion and calming influence, that there are many pieces of music that might have exactly the opposite effect, and so you don't actually want that on a playlist that will then generate negative emotions and feelings. And I know with working with music therapists, that is a big issue, that if you've got a group music therapy session and there's a therapeutic choir at St Pat's nursing home, and that's what happens there, is you play one song and 3/4 of the group love it and are singing along and it's very positive, and then there are the other people with their arms folded because they do not want to be singing that song. And it's the same with Easter Seals, that the project's there. Not everybody likes the same music, and so the sort of emotions can be quite different. So it's why personalised playlist is so important.
There was one instance where we had a woman, and she liked this particular recording artist, and so we got a whole bunch of music from that recording artist. But every time that a romantic song would come up, she'd get very sad. And we found out afterwards that's what her and her husband would listen to, and so it reminded of her husband being dead, and so they kind of put that in another section, that she could listen to when she wanted to feel those emotions, but not mix it with the sort of happier style of things.
Can I ask a...
Please.
I just have a comment. It might be interesting, actually, to post the playlist for the staff to be aware of what the person's playlist is. Because I know in some long-term care facilities, what they've done is done like a mural or of pastiche of photos from the person's past, so that instead of seeing this old wrinkled up person with no identity, you can say, wow, that person was a school teacher, or wow, that person was a clown, or whatever. So if you post the playlist, I mean, if we had known, I mean, Cab Calloway, right? It's like, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Right? You get a whole different image for who that person is if you know. So it might also help.
Yeah, it helps the caregivers
to provide
realize
better care.
there's the different aspects of this person and how they were in their context.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have one other question about the playlist, and then I'd like to turn to the audience. But the playlist assumes that it's a piece of music that is the important thing. And one example that comes to my mind is I've been talking to some survivors from residential schools about why certain music is important to them. And for instance, in Labrador, the hymn Till We Meet Again is very, very important for all sorts of people there. But when people talk about why that's important, one of the comments that really struck me is, I hear all the voices of the families that have always been the leaders of the singing in our community. And so it's the timbre, it's the quality of the voices and those memories of the people rather than the piece. So just a question about what exactly is it? Is it the piece, or is it something else about the sonic structure? I mean, Jane talked nicely about rhythm.
I think for a lot of the questions with people with dementia, it's association. And so it could be the space in which something's been performed, so you associate it with hearing it in a particular place. And so it's not just the song that's been sung, but it's how resonant it sounds when you're hearing it, which is similar to your talking about the voices. The song itself might not actually be something that you particularly like, but it's one that you associate really strongly with maybe having to sing it at school, or you sung it when you knew somebody, and you have that association. So it's not the song itself that you like, but it's what that song reminds someone of, and it conjures up then not just emotions but memories of a particular place. And that's what I think with dementia, that it allows people to reconnect with their families, and that's what drew me to music therapy initially, was watching that with a music therapist, and people sort of talking about their life stories through hearing one song, and it was enough to then spark what somebody remembered from their past, and then allowed them to connect with their family members, like you were saying, that family member had no conversations with the individual that we were working with. It was, they connected through a song, and we happened to come across that song.
Carolyn.
I just have two kind of related questions to the project of the use of the iPod. One, I think the project raised some really important questions about staffing shortages and the feasibility, I guess, of it being used. If nursing staff aren't, or the staff that are supposed to be responsible for this don't have buy-in, have you thought about, or has it been discussed, the ways to make this really embedded in how to make it actually happen, rather than something that only if they're being watched, it ends up happening. I don't know. But that's, and this is talking from experience of having worked on a mental health unit, where sometimes the things that are seen as kind of like, oh, well, that's kind of extra, we'll do that if we have time, they get pushed to the side. So what, perhaps the study is also saying a lot about the system and the structure. And so how can that be used to improve the system and the structure as well? And also related, I guess, is there the danger of just thinking about this, the self and health being related to one's individual self versus a community? And in terms of low staffing, my my concern would be that if somebody's left, it becomes something that they just get the headphones put on and just, and then they rely on somebody for taking those off, or maybe, those kinds of questions. So I guess those were things I just wondered if that had come up, for you. Or,
Sure. So from a program implementation perspective, on actually making something sort of get some traction, and that's a hard thing to do. There's lots of great ideas, but the actual skill of making it happen on the front lines is a whole other kettle of fish. And it's often very different than what you think it's going to be, and the pitfalls that you run into. So part of my goal in this project is to learn how to implement this project. And so the nursing home that we used in Carbonear is actually one of the highest usage rates of antipsychotics in Eastern Health, which is the highest in all of Canada. So, and they've had these staffing shortages there. So that was the challenging one. Right? Now, St. Luke's has a music therapy program that is going gangbusters, and they've got a really strong community, and everyone kind of really bought into it. So that was the easy one. So, and it's interesting sort of contrasting the two and seeing how it goes. You can't force people to do stuff if they don't want to do it. So I think really there's the leadership of having the management in a group, in a nursing home or wherever it is, really selling it and consistently selling it. And being engaged and buying in and being there on the floor saying, we're doing this and this is what it's going to do, it's going to be great, and getting that enthusiasm. And once people start getting the buzz, they get some enthusiasm behind it, then they tend to be a lot more engaged. I don't know if you noticed, but one of the things in that video about Henry that really strikes me is the reaction of the staff, of that nurse who wanted to do something for this patient, and he was just sitting there. And finally she got a tool that allowed something to get better. Right? And just the joy on her face and the laughter. Right? And I think this is one of the problems, especially in the system, because there are a lot of people who are being pushed. They're short-staffed, they're working overtime, they're being burned out, and management is just cracking the whip because they have to, they got no other choice. And so a lot of people that I see are really, really want to do a good job, but they're just being burnt out. And that's true of the frontline staff. It's true of the management too. And so, if you can give it something like this that has a bit of hope, that speaks to the human spirit, and maybe engages in some sort of cutting edge research that people can sort of feel a little bit proud of, And I think that it's great for the patients. But I'm also really interested in the effect on the staff, on engagement, because we have a very low engagement rate in Eastern Health. People just show up for work, they're 2 years from retirement, they don't give a darn anymore. They're just going to do what they're going to do and not one iota more. It's beyond their job description. And that's hard to work with. It's hard when people just go, no. So a little bit of inspiration, and some people it doesn't catch on, but some people really buy into it. And I think the more people buy into it, then you get a bit of momentum. And then if we get an iPod drive and we get it talking on the radio, and people start sort of hearing about it from a couple of different places, it's got a lot more chance of getting people to buy into it.
When do you think it can become part of the actual treatment plan? It's,
for everybody? I don't think it ever will be for everybody.
Not for everybody, just like medications aren't for everybody. I'm saying it actually is, like in the UK, they have something, arts on prescription. It's something prescribed. Do you see that as being something, music on prescription, basically?
Absolutely. I mean, I would really like to see it not just in all the nursing homes for the people who want to avail of it, but what's already happening through some of these projects is not just in Carbonear. It wasn't just the nursing home, but some of the people who were involved with the nursing home kind of heard about it and then brought it to their parent who they were looking after in their home, who was having some of the same behavioral issues, some of the same medication challenges, and using it at home to prevent people getting agitated and then having things decompensate and then needing to go into an institution. I mean, ideally, everyone stays in their home until they die. And one of the big things I think that triggers people going into a nursing home is when the caregiver burns out. And a big cause of that I see is when people start getting aggressive, when dementia starts getting violent, and they start hitting, and that's when the caregiver goes, I just can't take this anymore. And they show up and emerge, and that. So I think if we can kind of push this from the nursing home as a sort of the first step, but out into the community, into a larger context, I think it's got a really high potential. To speak to your question about the marginalization, if we just stick headphones on somebody and stick them in a corner, I think people are being stuck in corners anyway, and at least they got some music. And so I don't think that it would actually facilitate somebody being stuck in a corner. If anything, it's going to give them one more thing to do that will engage them on an intellectual, on an emotional, on multiple levels. And what I can see happening is once we get the iPods and we get all this stuff worked out for the iPods, well then the iPhones are going to become obsolete and we're going to get the secondhand iPhones. And then we're going to get smartphones in the nursing homes. And we're going to get people having, real-time conversations with Aunt Bessie in the nursing home over there and being able to go into the archives and see their family tree and a whole lot of other stuff once we get into that level of things. And I see the iPhone, or the iPod and the music as being the first step into that larger kind of electronic resource.
I just, sorry, but I see your point of they're going to be shoved in a corner, anyhow, if that's the case. But
I don't like that way of saying it.
No, I understand. But if you think about music as it can be a form of torture at a certain point, if you don't have control over that, so it's just something,
Sure.
There's always been.
And a big part of this, and a big part of the sort of the ethics part of it, was that somebody. Most of the time, they can indicate their wishes anyway. If they don't like it, it's getting flicked. Right? Or they'll say no thank you, or whatever. But they'll indicate in some way that, no, they don't want to do that right now. And I think of people that once they've gotten past the point of responsiveness, that they can't actually do that, that's where I think you have to be a lot more careful. But even so, there was this thing on the radio recently about that fellow in the UK who was locked in. He was perfectly aware, but he couldn't communicate at all. On levels that people could understand. And so, one of the big things that would happen for him is if somebody, left a radio playing or right? So something is better than nothing. And I think, even people who are in comas, who are so-called brain dead, I think there's a lot of usefulness in role of music. We had a palliative patient last week. One of my patients was dying at the end of a whole bunch of stuff. And sometimes it goes easily, and sometimes it goes very difficult. It's very difficult, and this was a more difficult one. It was really hard to get her comfortable, and she was gasping, and the family were there, and they were like feeling every inch of that pain and discomfort. And then we played some music. We played some nice hymns that this person, and the whole mood of the room just changed. And so even if somebody can't indicate whether they like the music or not, I think in the larger context of the family and the caregivers and all the people that person is connected to, music has a big role for all of those people too.
I think that there does have to be, going back to Karen's point, a very careful use of music, because otherwise it starts becoming something that people have been doing research on the effects of background music, and when you're in a public space where you can't, or even less of a public space, but maybe you're in a doctor's office where you can't leave the place, or a hospital waiting room, and you're forced to listen to the music, and that can actually increase stress levels rather than decrease them. And so that's why I think the personalised playlist, and it's not just a personalised playlist, but the ability to stop it if you want. And that's the challenge. And we have the same challenge in Easter Seals, where the participants, some of the people, are non-verbal, and we have to ensure that there is a way that those participants can tell us when they don't want to be participating. Mm-hmm. And for most of those individuals, it's a yes-no with eyes moving up and down. So we can ask people, but while music seems to be the answer to lots of things, and I think the idea of a prescription is one way to ensure that people take it seriously and don't view it as something that's optional, because the nurses don't view a prescription that says to have a drug as being optional or not. They don't tend to say, well, I don't think I'll bother with that today because I don't have time to go to that individual. But that's not an issue. So if music is deemed to be as important as studies are suggesting it to be, then it ought to be on prescription, and it ought to be something then that it's not a choice whether or not it's given or not. But just as a prescription matches the needs of the person when it's medication, it ought to be meeting the needs, which means that if once a day is appropriate, then that's what you get, or if it's all day is appropriate, or if it's listening to Mozart all day or listening to whoever, that's what it is, and that it's viewed therefore like a drug and is administered in the same way. And I don't think that for some people listening to music all day, it doesn't matter what it is, it's perfectly calming, but that's not the case for everybody, and that's what I think one of the concerns with the use of music in extended care facilities, where it could become something that actually could be detrimental if it was used incorrectly, just as the drugs that you're trying to diminish using have become overused. And I think that you have to be careful that it doesn't become just a replacement of that.
Absolutely agree.
And that we underestimate the power of music.
But we do that also on a number of levels already. I mean, when somebody loses their ability to participate wholly or partly in their own care decisions, we have a fairly established way of approaching that to try to ensure the best interests of that individual, that they have as much participation as they are able to in their care. Things like end of life issues. And we have a substitute decision maker that gets appointed, and if there is no substitute decision maker, then there's a whole triage level of, well, it goes to the family member, then it goes to this one, and it goes to extended family, and then at the end of it, if there's no one else, and then that happens sometimes, it comes to the physician and the nursing staff, and then we have ethics boards that can kind of come around there if there's something that's a little bit, some people aren't quite comfortable with. So I think we have a fairly well-established way of trying to ensure that. But I absolutely agree, that's a very important point.
There's probably a whole range of ethical issues that could still be raised here, but are there other questions? Or is the audience also getting burnt out?
Yes, I just wanted to address what you mentioned at the end of your slide, hopefully for the next phase of this project. I've known Aaron for many years, and when we talked about this project a bit, and I was the one who suggested that about the use of the archives, which I think in Newfoundland is probably potentially a really great resource. Well, we haven't got quite to that stage yet, but that, like you were saying, that the timbre and the vocal quality, I think can be really important. I don't have any medical background, but just from my musical background, imagine that if you look into even the basics of an individual's life history of where they're from and where they were living at that sort of peak time, that they're going to remember. And my idea was if you got to go into the folklore archive or into some of the big song collections, most know pretty well, that are at the National Archives, and get the field recordings of people that they potentially know or have that same sort of vocal quality that they were used to hearing at that point in their life. It might produce some more interesting results. So I just want to expound on that point that you mentioned at the end.
Mm-hmm.
We see that on a very small scale with the archival recordings we make from the research center here, where people will say, would you please give us another copy because Uncle Joe no longer is remembering those songs, and so we'll make extra family copies sometimes of those old things. But sometimes communities do that work. They're their own archivists, and maybe this is something we should all be promoting. Right now, Placentia, for instance, is creating an exhibit on resettlement from the 50s and 60s, and they're making music an element that's right at the center of it because there were so many incredible singers from those islands. And as they begin to do the research, and I mean they started with collections that we had at the university, but they're beginning now to contact all the families of all those singers, and all these other collections it's becoming a community archive that has been created together by the community. And I can imagine that would be a resource for medical practitioners in that area, perhaps. But
I've been wondering, actually, they have a Janeway telethon once a year. We should have an elder telethon, and we should use music. We should get the folklore community, and anyway. So the iPod Drive may be a little spark that has a potential of rolling into larger things.
CBC, of course, has shows such as musical memories that sometimes draw on pieces that are particularly significant for people. So there may be already some resources there. Are there any final questions? Yes.
What about short-term memory with people who have dementia? Because that's often a source of frustration for them. It's the fact that short-term memory is what's most immediate.
Most affected, yeah.
So any evidence that your music therapy program has impact there?
No, that hasn't been sort of the direct area that we've noticed. I guess it's more on a kind of a practical level that when somebody is agitated in the morning when they're getting their morning care and they're getting their sponge bath by people who they can't remember, they're complete strangers to that person. And I'd probably be a bit agitated if a complete stranger came and started taking my clothes off. But if they play the music, in some individuals, it makes a huge difference. And they don't get agitated and they don't try to punch the nurse. And everybody likes that. So I don't know if that speaks.
Well, perhaps this is the start of something that we'll all be thinking about and reading about in the days to come. We do already have an Oxford Handbook of Medical Ethnomusicology, which might be of interest to people. It was early days when it came out, so I'm not sure about the sophistication of all the research in it, but there is a lot of work going on around the world. I'd like to thank Fern, Jane, and Aaron for a very stimulating evening, and thank you, audience, for being here.
Thank you. I have just one last sort of parting comment in that they've shown that if you link music with enjoyable experience, that it sort of anchors those experiences in your memory much more strongly. And so I would encourage everybody to get started on their list. Right? Have your experiences, play the music with it, and then take that list with you as you age, and then you'll be all set.